This is David Olshan of Nevada Legal Services. This is another in our series of substantive law videos, this one concerning getting out of a lease legally. We need to make a disclaimer right away because this is the law as written, and this is the way the law should be enforced. However, there are judges and landlords who don't follow the law. So please be advised that if you do follow this advice, you may have a landlord who reports you to a credit reporting agency or sues you, and a judge who may agree with the landlord. So use caution, and it is much better to work this out with the landlord, but if you can't, you can enforce your laws as we're describing them, but they may not be enforceable. Now, I'm going to be talking about Nevada's Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, Chapter 118A, and the reasons under the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. There are other reasons to break a lease legally, but we will not cover them here, and again, use caution. So you have habitability when your apartment is not maintained, when you have a material breach of the lease, when the landlord isn't doing something required in the lease, when you're the victim of domestic violence, stalking, or harassment, if you are in need of health care that you cannot get at your current dwelling, or your roommate dies, those are other reasons to break a lease legally. Or if there's fire damage or other casualty, those are the reasons under 118A to break a lease legally. Okay, NRS 118A 350 and 355 are material lease violation and habitability. Generally speaking, you have to give the landlord 14 days written notice, and the landlord must not comply. If the landlord uses his best efforts to fix the problem, then you can't enforce your rights. Or if a member of your household or a guest caused this problem, you can't use these provisions. But if that doesn't apply and the landlord doesn't fix the problem or use the best efforts to fix the problem, you can proceed and you can break your lease and leave. The landlord must return your prepaid rent and security deposit, and that's what the law allows. If you are the victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, stalking, you can terminate your lease and move. You must supply written notice to your landlord within 90 days of the event causing you to want to move, and you can move 30 days later after you supply that written notice, or at the end of the lease, whichever is sooner. So what they wanted to do here, if you were at the end of your 30-day period, let's say the 28th of the month, you could issue that notice and leave 2 days later, because these are serious situations and a landlord should let you out of the lease. With your written notice, you have to include a report from law enforcement, a copy of your protection order, or an affidavit from a doctor, social worker, marriage therapist, or nurse treating you for domestic violence. So you have to supply that written notice, I'm leaving, and supply support for your reason, a report to the police, a protection order, or an affidavit from a doctor, social worker, or whoever has talked to you. Now we're talking about NRS 118A 340. If you're in need of health care or the death of a roommate, all these conditions must apply. You have to have a mental or physical disability or are older than 59. You have to have a physical or mental condition that requires treatment that cannot be provided in a current dwelling. If you're just upset or want to move closer to your doctor, that's not a reason. The reason has to be the treatment cannot be provided in the current dwelling. The tenant or co-tenant can terminate the lease by providing written notice that describes the disability and condition requiring the move. You have to provide 30 days notice and provide this notice within 60 days of your moving. If your roommate dies, you can provide 60 days notice to the landlord within 3 months after the death of your roommate. These are a little bit confusing, but basically for a physical or mental condition, it's 30 days notice. And for a roommate that's dying, it's 60 days notice. So it's better to do that before you move out. Also, again, you might want to discuss this with your landlord and work it out, because sometimes the landlord doesn't care about the law. The landlord could send your account to a collection agency, and then you are going to have to explain it or sue the landlord for your security deposit and have a judge determine how much you owe. Fire or casualty. If there's a fire or casualty, earthquake, flood, riot, whatever, you can terminate the lease and move by providing 7 days notice, but this fire or casualty must substantially impair your dwelling. The lease terminates when you move. You can stay if it's lawful, but rent should be reduced by the proportion of decrease in value of the dwelling. If you do terminate the lease and leave with the 7 days notice, the landlord must return prepaid rent and a security deposit. If you, a member of your household, or a guest caused the damage, you can't use this remedy. If you have none of these legal reasons to abandon, there is NRS 118.175. It's not in the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, it's in 118. If you break the lease, the landlord has a duty to re-rent it. The landlord can't charge you double rent, meaning the landlord moves someone in and charges you for the unexpired term. The landlord can't intentionally leave your dwelling vacant to heap damages upon you. The landlord must use reasonable efforts to re-rent the dwelling. And if the landlord fails, then the landlord can only charge you for the amount of time between your move and when the landlord finds out. So if you give the landlord notice, I'm moving out, and you move out, and the landlord doesn't use a reasonable effort to try to re-rent it, the landlord can't charge you for leaving early. However, your lease may have a provision that changes this right. So if you have questions about any of these laws that I've covered, please contact us at Nevada Legal Services. We are Nevada Legal Services. In Southern Nevada, call 866-432-0404. In Northern Nevada, 800-323-8666. We provide free legal assistance, and we can explain your rights and whether you have a legal basis to terminate your lease and leave.